Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Saturday morning D&D show. My name is Jordan with a silent PH in the middle, and I am joined always by my wonderful co-host, Sir Lucien, over at Sir Lucien Gaming. Say hello, sir.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Saturday morning. Here we are in the throes of summertime, but we're still playing Dungeons & Dragons a ton.
Oh, yeah. We were just talking beforehand that I'm playing 3 games all on the weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
And talking about doing another game.
And yeah, I'm in a play, and I've got a baby on the way, and it's a lot of crazy stuff here. So we got some new people in YouTube chat that are tuning into the show for the first time. So I want to say welcome, Face Punch. Welcome, Face Punch. It's really good to have you here. That's a great username. So super fun. If you're new here, we're a Dungeons & Dragons talk show, and we kind of just talk about news, like lore, things we find interesting, new releases, and then we kind of wrap it up and talk about our home games that we're currently running and or playing in, and the different challenges that we have that come about through playing Dungeons and Dragons, and so that you can learn and everyone can learn from us and we can learn from you, and it's really great. So yeah, excited to have you guys here. Definitely. So, starting off with some news, Boulders Gate. That's happening.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it quite a few times. I thought I'd put it in the notes again just to keep those dates in mind. 9/17, so the 17th of September, which is, if we look at our clock, 30-ish days from now. We've got 1 month to go. So if you're running your Saltmarsh campaign, somebody I know, just got to wrap that up, because you got to be ready to bring your characters to Boulders Gate, right? You just got to keep.
I think we talked about it with my Saltmarsh group, and I think when Saltmarsh, I think we're going to finish Saltmarsh. Obviously, we like Saltmarsh; it's a lot of fun. But there's been a lot of talk of doing Descent into Avernus. After that, but we've kind of just skipped over Dungeon of the Mad Mage and Waterdeep Dragon Heist, which is funny because my DM was like super excited about Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and he read the whole thing and he plotted out everything, and we were all set to play that. But then Acquisitions Incorporated came out, and now we're all really excited to play that. So we're gonna play that instead of Waterdeep Dragon Heist. So part of me is like, maybe I should pick up Waterdeep, because everyone says it's a really good lore resource for the city of Waterdeep. But I specifically didn't pick it up because I didn't want to have spoilers if I was going to play in it. But it looks now like I probably won't be playing in it, which is just kind of funny how that happens. Like, you get wrapped up in one campaign and then you kind of miss one or two and then whatever. But I was talking again with my DM about it, and I'm like, I feel like a lot of those I can read them and enjoy them and be like, I might never run this or get to play in it, but at least I kind of know the overall story, and they're fun to read. Like, I like reading adventure books. They're just fun to read. Yeah. So,
well, and certain campaign books they put out are books that you could run for a year or two before you finish. Like if you did Storm King's Thunder, that's a 2-year campaign if you run through the whole thing. I would think Dungeon of the Mad Mage could be a 2, 3, or 4-year campaign, because you're going from levels 1 to 20 or 5 to 20, however you want to decide to do that. So that's interesting. But then you have books like Saltmarsh, which I think you can get done a little bit quicker, like Tales from the Yawning Portal. You can string those together a little quicker and you can get those ones done. So it's a nice mix at the moment of books that you could probably complete before the next one's out, versus there's no way you're going to complete the one before the next one's out. So now you got to decide what you're going to do or how you're going to incorporate that. So.
Yeah. And then there's the people that just buy them and steal ideas for their homebrew campaigns, because there's that's a whole thing, which is funny that I miss doing a homebrew campaign. But there's so much content from Wizards that I want to play that I just am like, every time I think about running another homebrew campaign, I'm like, but then we're not playing Tomb of Annihilation. Like, we're not playing Waterdeep. We're not playing Acquisitions Incorporated. And I feel like I'm missing out on these adventures, not like diving into them by running a home game. And I wonder if other people feel like that too. You can let us know in the chat if you feel that way as well. So
I've been enjoying watching other groups play them. Usually I'll watch Adam Koebel's group go through some of the main stuff, and I enjoy watching their characters kind of go through stuff. It's funny you say that, because I think all of my stuff is homebrew campaign if I'm running it. I don't, except for Storm King's Thunder was the only official one I ran.
Which is that on hiatus, or is that finished? Like, are you?
Yeah, that one fizzled out when the group of people, we couldn't get the schedules together.
Yeah.
with the
Which
group
happens.
of people. So, and I haven't really gathered another group to throw them back at the middle of that. It may come back at some point if schedules ever come back around, because I did enjoy the module, and it was my first Dungeons and Dragons official module that I was going to try to do as a dungeon master, because everything before that had just been homebrew stuff or stuff I was making up. But I'm also really loving, like you said, the homebrew stuff, because I can grab things. So like when Ravnica came out, the book Ravnica came out, I grabbed the races from that and put them in my world, because I just loved the extra races, the playable races. So I had a Loxodon in our campaign, and we had this other stuff that was pretty fun. The other book I want to grab stuff from for my campaign is Boulders Gate, Descent to, I always say, I saw people in chat talking about how to pronounce it. I say Avernus because I was understood in one of their videos. They said it's like saying a furnace. Say Avernus, but I think when I originally read it, I would say it like you did, Avernus.
Yeah.
Change that, but who cares?
I've been trying to pronounce it correctly because people are, but nobody.
Yeah, you get it more than anybody because you do lore videos, so you have to be correct.
I don't have to. Let's be honest. It is an interpretation, but yeah.
Right. So I think that's good. So I'm gonna grab. I have a nice big demon versus devil thread going through my campaign right now, where there's the devils have hired my group to help keep the demons down. And so it's like they're picking the lesser evil of two evils, but that's still going to be bad in some way. And I'm sure that book is going to have some stuff in it that's going to be really cool and relevant to what I could do in mine. Even if it's just more devil and demon stats, more types of those creatures that I can throw at them. Maybe an infernal machine fight at some point could be really cool. So I don't know if I'm going to send them to Baldur's Gate. I don't think that'll happen. They'll stay where they're at. But I like pulling things out. So I definitely think I'm the dungeon master that's grabbing pieces from these books that are coming out, though I'm not playing them. But we all know people that you've played through quite a few of them. I'm playing in Tomb of Annihilation, which I love. We have dungeon masters that we all are friends with that are running the official books as is. So
I mean, just to correct you there, I have read almost all of them, but I've only ran parts of Tales of the Yawning Portal. I ran White Plume Mountain and Tomb of Horrors, and I have ran, and that's about it. And then I've read all of them, and I've been making like lore videos on like the lore campaigns explained, like the lore you should know if you're going to run this campaign. So I kind of do these in-depth things, but no, it's been all homebrew except for that. And then the one. Because we, instead of playing a Wizards of the Coast one, we played Hot Springs Island, which is not Wizards of the Coast, but a really fun, awesome adventure that you should all check out. So,
Well, and I'm super excited for the one that they talked about, the re-release of the Tyranny of Dragons one, the one that they're putting two things
I'm curious
together.
about that.
I'm really interested in that one too.
Like, I like that they're going to fix a bunch of stuff because there were some like glaring problems with the original one. And I like that they're going to put both adventures into one book as it kind of should have been from the beginning. But, and I'm not alone in this opinion, is that it is kind of the like worst of all of the Wizards of the Coast adventures so far. And I can see why they're re-releasing it, because it was their first one. It launched 5th edition, and why not do that? But at the same, and so that's where I'm curious. I don't own those books, so I'm curious about picking up the re-release just to see how they fixed and changed it, and maybe made it a little more balanced, give you a little more motivation to go from A to B rather than just kind of, well, as a dungeon master, you're supposed to go here, so let's go here. Like, that's kind of how it feels, how it was written a little bit. So
and the cover art looks fantastic. I mean, looked beautiful. And I like the idea of a re-release, an anniversary release of those things, and an updating of them, and putting two things together. I just like the idea of that one. And it's dragons. I mean, if they just had a dungeon book, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, I guess would be a good one. And then dragons, Tyranny of Dragons. You've got the two pillars of Dungeons and Dragons right there. So yeah, we're excited. I just thought we would throw out the date out there to keep it on everybody's radar. There's obviously other stuff coming out, like the Rick and Morty's books coming out, but we talked about those, and we've seen those dates and stuff that keep coming around. All that stuff is happening like in this kind of September, October, November timeframe. We see a lot of releases, and I think that just lines up with the holiday releases, so that a lot of people, if they want to get holiday gifts and stuff, all those things are on the shelves ready to go and be gifted out to people. And we'll have probably it's funny, like we say, we buy them all, even if we're not playing. Like we were just talking about your shelf right behind you where all your books are. I mean, all those books are sitting down there, and you haven't ran any of them, like you said, or at least partial ones, yet you have them all and you love reading through them and you love having them. So it's really cool. So we enjoy it. The other thing I thought we know we're getting close. We talked a little bit about last week was Adventure League Season 9. So Season 8's wrapping up. We're kind of in that middle area of in between season stuff. And I just saw Greg Tito was talking about Season 9 should be starting October 29th is what he said is when the 2 adventures that have been created go live on DMSGuild. And that should be a little bit just after Boulders Gate. So it's my understanding is Boulders Gate is Season 9. And he kind of said that in the video, so I don't think they're changing that. But he also did mention that they've gotten their feedback from the survey, and they're still thinking about all their changes, so nothing's set in stone. They don't have the rules for Season 9 yet, and they're still talking about the treasure checkpoints that apparently they got a lot of feedback that people didn't like treasure checkpoints because they broke the immersion. And I kind of thought, I didn't put it in the notes, but I thought that was a weird thing to say about an Adventure League game, because you know what else breaks immersion? Not having the same group the next week you go into your game store to play. You know what else breaks immersion? The DM that's running some other adventure that has nothing to do with what you did a week ago. And now you're in, Dungeon of the Mad Mage Adventures League. Next week, you get a different DM at a different table. Maybe you're running, whatever else is out there. So it doesn't.
We were talking. This is also not in our show notes, but it's an interesting topic. We were talking about just the lack of role play with Adventure League games, because it is different people all the time. And it felt like when we were doing Adventure League games, or at least when I was doing Adventure League games, it was always kind of this awkward trying to get to combat. Because in combat, we knew what to do and we had rules and stuff, but trying to get a bunch of random people together to try and like role play and make it happen just didn't work as much. Now I say that, but then I went to Gen Con and played a really great Dungeon Crawl Classics game where everybody was like role playing like crazy, and everybody kind of like, no, but then they hand them NPCs, or not NPCs, they hand them characters that are very much like, you're a farmer, you're this, like you're an astrologer. And so you kind of can build characters based off of just your job that your character had. But Adventure League was always kind of just that awkward, like, can we just fight something? Because in fighting, I have rules and structure and I know how to play the game. But outside of fighting, it was always just like, can we get to our next fight? And so I don't know.
It's sometimes hard to build that cohesiveness with a group at first. Like even brand new campaigns with a brand new group of players that are coming together, they don't gel yet. They don't have their characters dialed in yet until they get in several sessions deep. And now that chemistry starts to happen. And you're expecting that to happen, each time you go to Adventure League night or whatever. Like I would think in your DCC game, if they were handed, I don't know, a 4th level DCC characters instead of the very first level stuff, I think a lot of people can do. But like if you just got handed these people that supposedly have existed in this world for a long time and have been adventurers for a long time, how do you explain that? And why are we together? And why are we making these decisions? Or why do I care what you do when I've only met you 30 seconds ago? But I do agree at Gen Con, every group I played with, they all sat down and wholeheartedly role played whatever character. It didn't matter what system it was. They jumped on their character. They were mostly given pre-mades and ready to run with it. So I wonder if that's a way to play like a Dungeons and Dragons game when you have a bunch of people you don't know, is maybe starting out with some pre-mades, build that chemistry with the little group. And then if that group ever does stay together, then maybe move on to, okay, now everybody can create their own characters and do what they want. But that nice, here's some pre-mades and let's go. Interesting idea.
I know.
So other than that, news-wise, we saw some lore you should know, which we always know Jordan puts out some good stuff. We saw Jordan's video this week, but I saw on the D&D channel, they talked about Fae, obviously the Red Wizards part of it, which is the part we mostly know about. Obviously, Fae has not existed the entire timeline, but it's the piece that they focus on and they kind of talk where it's at. It's kind of up in the... What is that? The great northeastern
northeast
from the
area,
Sword Coast.
of Faerun. So, and it's interesting because Thay actually influences a lot of the Sword Coast, but they're all wizards for the most part. So they use portals to get here and do their evil Thayness on in like Waterdeep and Neverwinter and stuff. They've always kind of been this interesting far off villain that's very, very present at the same time. So
a mage-tocracy, I think is what they call it, which I thought is a cool word. And that's one of the things that Chris Perkins kind of said, is that they've always been a really good, you want to have a big evil empire influencing what's happening with wherever your party is, then Thay has always been a good stand-in for a good evil in the background empire that still influences stuff that's going on. So that's pretty good. But he's also said that recently in the adventures they've been creating, they've been putting hints in that Thay is starting to have problems and not everybody is agreeing anymore. And maybe there's going to be a shakeup in Thay. So maybe we're going to
really cool. Yeah.
So maybe that's leading into an adventure that maybe at some point will take us off of the Sword Coast. Imagine that. And move us into some other part of Forgotten Realms, which is enormous.
Well, and so I've been doing these Zakara videos, which is another continent on Toril, which is the planet where Faerun is at. And there's just so much that they could do. But all of their adventures, well, except for Chult, well, that was kind of cool. Like Tomb of Annihilation.
That's kind of Sword Coast, though, if you look at it.
Well, but it's always been very separate. And it was a second edition. Chult was very much a second edition thing that they took and they updated it to make it for 5th edition. Like there was a little bit of 4th edition stuff on Chult and there was a little bit of 3rd edition, but for most part, it was a 2nd edition, like Jungles of Chult module that you're going to get the most of your lore and you're going to get all this stuff. And they took ideas like Rasnisi and he's an NPC and they took him and they made him this cool, like instead of a human, like he had changed and he was no longer the Rasnisi of 2nd edition. He was now the 5th edition version, which was drastically different from the rest of the game. And it's really, really cool stuff. So they could potentially do it, but I wonder if it's just, I wonder if it comes down to stories and they're like, this is the story we want to tell. And in order to tell that story, it would best be placed with Thay. And so that's when we get a like, hey, I really want to tell this story. And then they look to where is the best place for that story to be told. And unfortunately, when you have characters like Jarlaxle and things like that, then you're going to be on the Sword Coast because they're like, wow, I really want to tell this like heist story. And I want to use these villains like Xanathar and stuff. It's like, well, we got to place it in Waterdeep then. So.
And I think it makes sense that they're still very supportive of Ed Greenwood, and Ed, though he has written of other places of Forgotten Realms, a lot of his more recent stuff and a lot of the stuff he still does now is kind of Sword Coast.
Yeah, that's
so
his
kind
baby.
Of ties into that kind of stuff. And their main characters and their computer games that are coming out, it's all, Boulders Gate and it's Waterdeep and these big towns that are right there in that coast. We don't really know, like we could say Thay, but what's the big couple of towns in Thay, or what's the big couple of towns in these other places? Those aren't as known. We have to go to Jordan's channel to find those.
Yeah, Jordan doesn't even know off the top of his head.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting, and I'm always and so that was another really curious thing of like, well, we're gonna start again in Boulders Gate with Descent into Avernus, and then, but that's a huge step is to go to the Nine Hells. Like that's like planescape hopping stuff. So it's kind of and again, it was probably like, hey, we want to tell a story. This is the best way to tell this story. We need to have an anchoring point. And I think there's also been a push to have the adventures kind of like linked together. Like if you want to play Storm King's Thunder for a little bit and then dive into the Underdark and play Out of the Abyss, you could come back up and finish Storm King's Thunder because they're all kind of happening. Like there's multiple threats to Faerun. And
and the timelines seem to be happening. So like the thing with the giants happened, and then after that we get the death curse happens.
Yeah.
So that is definitely the official kind of timeline of things going on. And then the death curse, whatever's happened with that, then we start talking about the Waterdeep and the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. You might get back up there at that point. And then during that sailing time, you obviously can do any of the salt marsh stuff, because you got a lot of sailing adventure stuff in there. And then obviously moving back up to Boulders Gate, like you're saying. And I like how the idea that it brings us to Chult brought us off the continent a little bit. So gave us a chance to get away from Sword Coast a little bit and to allow you to put it wherever you want. You could decide how Chult is in your game however you want it to be. Could be an island instead of a peninsula, which I think most people even think of it as. But then Descent into Avernus gives us, like you said, the planeswalking, the first real kind of official, we're going to move to another plane of existence of some sort. And hey, let's go to the 9 hells, one of the first levels of the 9 hells, and let's do that. So I think that's kind of cool too. So it's opening it up. It's definitely, we're in that mature part of 5th edition where I think they're not so worried about rules. They do want to add in some new features you can do, but they are starting to expand the overall world. And in all of those books, they usually have a paragraph at least talking about, you could set this in the world of Greyhawk, or you could set this in the world of Eberron, or you could set this in all these other places with a few minor tweaks or adjustments, or put it wherever you want. You don't necessarily have to leave it in Forgotten Realms, though I love Forgotten Realms myself. So the other lore you should know video that they put out, which I thought was an interesting one, they did like a D6 roll where they had a bunch of community smaller ones that weren't big enough to have their own show, but were big enough that they wanted to have him and Chris Perkins talk about, Greg Tito and Chris Perkins talk about. So we got a little bit of lore on gem dragons, which I didn't realize we had. I thought, because Matt Colville made his gem dragons and he put them in his book, and I thought, oh, okay, that's cool. We have gem dragons now. But I didn't realize there were already gem dragons out there.
Yeah, he said that they were in the original Monster Manual, or maybe it was the 2nd edition Monster Manual, but they've been around for a while. They just haven't, they're just not in 5th edition yet, except for Colville's thing.
Because I think that they started with a Dragon magazine, and how he remembers, like he was in Dragon magazine 91. They started.
I'm sure they do a lot of research before the show, but yeah, you're right.
But I've heard that's how he is. Like I've heard he just spouts that kind of stuff. Like that's the thing that stays in his head is that was in Dragon issue this. And then they had a book out, must have been in 3rd, called the Dragonomicon, maybe?
Yeah, that was a 3rd edition book, yeah.
Think about that. Think about the names and what they did in some of those books and how they compared to 5th edition books. Like, we don't have a 5th edition equivalent to Dragonomicon.
Which is just like the lore and history of dragons, yeah.
Yeah. So we got Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, and we've got Zolo's Guide, right?
Xanathar's Guide to Everything?
We have Xanathar's Guide, but we also have
Volo.
Olo.
Yeah.
Volo.
You said Zolo. I was very confused. Volo's Guide, yeah.
Volo's Guide.
To monsters or something.
So we have a couple of those. So maybe that's their equivalent, and I just forget about them. But so we'll see. Also, they talked about blights, which I liked a lot because I used those quite a bit in my Seeking Revenor campaign to really harry my players, because they had not really ran into creepy stick figure, evil plant kind of creature things. They were used to knowing how to deal with goblins and kobolds and all these other things that they might run into. They weren't ready for little needlemen or, the different types of blights that you can get, which were kind of cool. Talked a little bit more about Modrons, but we've had a discussion on Modrons before, so that was kind of a recap. Tarask was the same thing. And then they said something Wild Space I thought was a really interesting one, because we've talked about it with Spelljammer. And I got the impression when they talked about that, just as a funny note, you guys can go back and watch that. It's towards the end where they talk about Wild Space. But Greg Tito makes a joke about, again, Spelljammer confirmed. And Chris Perkins gives this really snide kind of smirk on his face. And he's like, no, it's not confirmed. And let me repeat, it's not confirmed. So I get this impression that maybe Chris Perkins doesn't like Spelljammer. So maybe he's one of the people that are also like,
I wonder if he gets asked about it a lot and he's just like, listen guys, it's not happening. Can we put this to rest? But people like Tito keep it going because they think it's funny.
Yeah. But I think it's possible too that there are some settings or there's some things material that maybe he just doesn't like personally. Like maybe he just doesn't like that whole concept, and that's not a book he wants to write. Or maybe, there's all these, like, there's a million other things we could write about, because
there was if I'm remembering correctly, there was a spell jamming helm, which is the like chair you sit in to control your spelljammer ship in Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Like in one of those many levels of Dungeon of the Mad Mage, there was like a broken down lost spell jamming helm. So they're keeping it alive and in some capacity. So, but I don't know. But it's a very different and I think in 4th edition they were like, no, stars are stars. And in 5th, and then again with Spelljammer, stars are not stars. There's a shell that encapsulates the known universe that we have, or the planetary system, your solar system. And what we think of as stars are just these pinprick holes that point to the plane of radiance that shine radiance down on us. So it's I don't know. It's just kind of like it changed a lot of how people interpret like how our actual universe is. They really made their own, like there are these weird shells and every universe has its own shell, and our prime material plane it's in these shells, and then you can travel from shell to shell. And so,
and I think it's a way to try to reinforce, though they haven't done it a lot, but they're trying to reinforce the idea that my D&D world could be different than Jordan's D&D world, could be different than,
but I could still travel from my D&D world to Lucian's world is the idea that we're all connected somehow.
They all could exist together. And if we're going to do that, let's tie them loosely to a multiverse kind of idea. Here's a loose thread. We don't have to dive in it too much, and then we can move on. It explains it all away, which I think is the way you should do it. Because I love the idea that they've gotten away from, no, this is the world and this is how it has to be, to this is the world, one of the worlds as we present it, and that can be your world, or you can change it or do whatever you want. They've really embraced the idea that the GM can make it very different if they want to. And I think that's a good way to go, instead of saying, no, this is Canton, this is how it is in Forgotten Realms, don't mess with it type thing. Because you don't want to get into the, that type of internet argument in these ages where it's like talking about canon or not canon and that kind of stuff.
And that's role-playing games. Like I was just reading this book called How to Write Adventures That Don't Suck by Goodman Games. It's a really awesome book about creating adventures for D&D or for role-playing games in general. And they said in that book specifically, it's a collaborative storytelling process. So don't be like, well, you guys have to go here because I say so, because I'm the DM. And it's like, in that case, just write a book or write a short story. But if you want the world to evolve, and if the idea is present problems for your players, and then however they want to fix those problems that's their choice. And you kind of like release control as a creative type, which is really difficult when you're writing an adventure, because you kind of have like, here's the 4 ways I think that they could like beat the big bad evil guy, or here's the 4 ways they can finish this campaign. And then they do something completely different that can kind of upset you as a dungeon master or as a writer, where you're like, but I didn't plan for that, and you kind of just have to like let it go and do it that way. So
yeah. And just leaning into creativity, letting the GMs kind of run it their way, I think is pretty good. Because you just don't want to make that fight. You just don't want to say, this is the way it has to be. It just doesn't work out that way. And there was I think at some point back in the day, it felt like that a little bit.
Yeah.
Our community was a little bit of that way. Goblins are this way, and goblins have to be this way in all campaign settings. And I like the idea that, no, my goblins can be very different than your goblins.
My goblins have a swimming speed and can breathe underwater, and they're water goblins, and they do all this other stuff, and they huck jars of acid at you. I'm like, well, that's not my goblin. Well, this is my goblins.
Even the great example of that is just Eberron, the way that Keith took the different things and turned them around, turned some things upside down and made certain things not evil and made other things kind of evil.
I don't think the Drow are evil, and they live in jungles off the coast of Eberron, the continent of Eberron. They live in their own little area, and they're just like these weird jungle elves. And that's what he did with the Drow. It was really cool.
So the other thing we did get news-wise, which was really cool, we got a Unearthed Arcana article.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've had that.
Yeah. Subclass for Barbarian and Monk, Wild Soul, and the Astral Self. Very interesting. So when we prefaced, we knew one was coming in a show, I think it was last week, and we knew it was coming. The thing I brought up was all of the other UA article stuff has influenced a book that's come out. So when we know that all these things they're testing have some influence on a genre of book that they're about to put out. So when we saw followers and stuff and sidekicks, that ended up coming out in one of the books. When we saw how to use vehicle rules, we're starting to see those things come out in books. Some of the subclasses we got Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and a bunch of those appeared in Xanathar's Guide. So it always leads to something. So my question is, we're looking at it. We haven't really dived into the mechanics of these quite yet, but what does Wild Soul and Astral Self?
The only thing I can think of is maybe like a Feywild book. Like it might be like, here's the history of the Feywild for 5th edition, or how to incorporate the Feywild in for 5th edition, and like subclasses that relate to the Feywild. But it really feels, especially the barbarian, that they took like a wild magic sorcerer and a barbarian and just smashed the two together, because it's like your rage just causes these weird magical things that you can't control. And there was an interesting topic on my Patreon Discord or a discussion, they were talking about this, and how a couple of my patrons were saying like they just didn't like the idea of a magical barbarian, that barbarians are like, they're anti-magic, or they're more divine. It's like spiritual, ancestral kind of things, rather than tapping into an arcane magic. And my counter argument was like, well, what if you had like a barbarian Eladrin from the Feywild? This would fit it very well. And they were like, yeah, I could see that. But at the same time, and I see their point too. It was just a good discussion that we had, where it's a weird one. The monk makes a little more sense to me. You're tapping into energies that's within you. But the barbarian one was it was off. And they're very overpowered. I was watching a video on, people were discussing how strong these are. And it's just like, obviously they'll probably tone them back in print, because they like to make them a little overpowered to see how people will use them and break them, so that they know where to pull back. But yeah, some of those Wild Soul Barbarian, that D8 that you can roll does crazy amounts of damage and gives you crazy amounts of temporary hit points. So
yeah. So it's definitely interesting. We only have one other mechanic, like you're saying, and that's the sorcerer mechanic if you do the wild magic. So I guess it makes sense if you're going to use another even if you were going to have a fighter that somehow taps into wild magic, or you're going to have a ranger that taps into wild magic. It's introducing this rollable table to see what results might happen. I think that's interesting, because I don't think that wild magic only has to be sorcerers, like you're saying, or like maybe people their minds go to first. I think anybody could. The origin story of the wild magic getting into somebody is so varied and so crazy that it could happen to any type of person, really. So I like the idea that they've kind of combined those two. I think of the two I'd want to play, I know a lot of people are saying that the one that they're really interested in is the monk, and that's the one that they wouldn't mind trying out or playing. I really like the barbarian, because I think I like that random mechanic to add some just craziness into what's going on. I've always been wanting to play a wild magic sorcerer, and I really should. I just keep playing wizards and warlocks, but maybe I should jump into my sorceress for my next character. Maybe I'll keep that in mind. But so that's out there. You can check it out. You can free download. It's obviously playtest material for now, but I've added playtest material into my games and let me play it, like the Rangers and the different things. So
yeah, we're currently playtesting the Artificer in my Saltmarsh game. So.
I love the Artificer. I can't wait to see that in the official books. It was a really good class, really fun. So that was the news I saw for the most part of Dungeons and Dragons. Just a lot of the releases that we've been hearing about. Nothing too new, but some good stuff that's out there on the channels. Obviously, you can always go and find. I saw a bunch of stuff getting still put up by, WebDM had their stuff. Nate put out a video recently too. You had your video. So there's all kinds of this really good people talking about Dungeons and Dragons, especially 5th edition stuff that you can find out there on the internet, which is really nice. So,
yeah, lots of D&D, lots of quality D&D YouTube right now. Just search Dungeons and Dragons on YouTube and you can find some really good people making some really cool stuff. A lot of people that are underrated. Like there's a couple of channels I've just discovered recently that have like 700 to 800 subscribers. And I'm like, this is like really good. Like they should definitely get noticed more, but it's about time and waiting for the algorithm to pick you up and things like that. So it's YouTube's a funny game, but on to games. Mr. Lucien, did you play any games this week? What did you play? What did you learn? How much fun did you have?
All of it. I had all the fun.
Wow, great.
So after coming off of a 2-week break because of Gen Con, got back into rolling some dice, which was really fun. We did my Monday night Seeking Revenor game, which is my West Marches kind of game. I threw a softball at them in a little bit of a way. They're 5th level characters, and I went and flipped through the book because I said, let's do something iconic while they're on their way to go somewhere. And this was a DM tip or trick that I've learned recently, or at least in the last few years, about we were at a point in our campaign where they're at town. We're going to take a 2-week break. There's going to be a month of downtime that happens. And then when we come back for our session, we're going to pick up from there. But the reality is I have no idea in my wide open world where they're going to go next. So many dungeon masters might start to fret or start deciding I need to prep everything because I don't know where they're going. They could go to a town to the north. They could go to a dungeon to the south. They could go on a sea adventure to the west, or, you know, whatever it might be. And you could really work yourself up into thinking, oh my God, I need to have all this prepared because I don't know what they're actually going to choose. And the reality is you don't have to do that. All you have to do is prepare one encounter to get you through that session until you know where they're going, so that you can then begin to prep all that other stuff you need to go. And now that I know where they're going and they've made their decision, I put a nice little encounter in there. We had some nice RP session. I chose a Chimera, which was a nice CR6 creature that a party of 4 5th level characters wiped out like within a round and a half. CR6 is clearly not a challenge for a party of 5 members. But they got to fight a Chimera, which was cool. We did something that was really funny too, because I thought this was just for the rule of cool kind of thing. They're like, you know what? We really want to be able to mount the Chimera's head back at our keep that we have, because now they have just finished fixing up their keep using the strongholds and followers rules. And why not have a big trophy room kind of thing of a Chimera? That seems really cool. And I thought they were like trying to figure out the logistics. Should we go back? And I was just like, I'm going to hand wave all that. I'm just going to let you guys take that back with you. It's going to be cool. You can mount it. It'll be kind of cool to have that up. So we did that. So the key was just build a nice little encounter that gives you a breathing space until you know where they're going. So no matter where they were going to go, this was going to happen as just a random encounter, though it was not random. Mm-hmm. So that I had time to say, oh, they're going to the Black Pyramid. Okay, I can finish prepping all the Black Pyramid stuff that I need to do. Because they're going to a nice evil Black Pyramid that's in my campaign, which is funny because some people may say, oh, didn't Jordan have a Black Pyramid in his campaign? Oh, Lucian's just stealing his ideas. But the truth is, I'm not stealing his ideas. I'm stealing Gary Gygax's ideas because I'm using a module from Gary Gygax from the old Dungeons and Dragons that I've dropped in my world. And it just happens to have a big black evil pyramid that has a bunch of nasty stuff going on in it. And my players are heading that way. So that's kind of cool. So that was fun to have them back into it, back in and playing. That was fun. And then we finally get to what I really wanted to talk about today the most. And that was this terrible DM that I have to play with on Wednesday nights, who's just a real jerk. Wow. And we got in this big old argument about, yeah, hopefully he doesn't watch. I can see him in chat right now. This big old jerk who's always trying to stop my character from doing cool stuff. Doesn't let me do anything fun. And we jumped into this thing, all hopefully sarcasm that you guys can hear while I'm saying this. But there's this thing that I didn't realize as a dungeon master, that a counter spell can be countered, right? And that makes sense to me. If I cast counter spell, then your wizard might say, well, you know what? I'm going to counter your counter spell so it doesn't work. But what I was having a hard time figuring out or dealing with was more that they started a spell, so they started a fireball spell or they started a lightning bolt spell. And in between that spell, I try to counter, then they counter me. They go back to casting the rest of the spell. And in my brain, I was just having such a hard time thinking about, well, I'm going to stop half of my spell now. I'm going to cast a totally different one. And then I'm going to come back to the spell I was casting and finish that one off. So there's this weird mechanic that was happening between, a spell duel. And I just thought that is such a weird mechanic. Did you know that's happened? Has that happened in one of your campaigns? Have you used that against your players?
You're talking about countering a counter spell?
Well, starting a fireball.
Okay.
Noticing you're going to get countered by somebody else, so then you counter them. Mm-hmm. Their counter spell, so you don't get countered, and you go back to casting your fireball.
Right. That's how it works, as far as I know.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It was... I have not ran a lot of wizards, actually. Now that I think about it, I don't think I've had a wizard in any of my games. So we have not run into weird counterspell things, but I know the argument and I've like looked it up. But yeah, that because you countered the counterspell, that original spell still goes off, and you have to like, it's weird because you're like layering things, and then there's a misunderstood rule where a lot of people believe, and I used to believe this too, that you can only cast one spell per action or per turn. So if I'm casting fireball, well then I can't cast counterspell because I'm already casting fireball. But that is not true. The rule is referencing bonus action spells, where if I cast a spell with a spell slot with a bonus action, then I can only cast a cantrip. But since you use your reaction for counterspell, you can totally counterspell a counterspell, and yeah, crazy mechanics. And we've seen it a couple of times in my Sunday game, because we do have a wizard in there, and he's very counterspell heavy. Like, he enjoys stopping that.
That's my guy. Yeah, my guy was wrapped around a counterspell wizard, so he's meant to stop another wizard. That's how I was building him.
Yeah, and that's kind of how this is, because I mean, spells can hurt and they can be really crazy. One of the interesting things I find about counterspell though is that we don't know what level to cast counterspell at. And so like, how do you handle that, or how does your DM handle that? Do you roll like Arcana checks to be like, yeah, you get the feeling that this is a 5th level spell, you get the feeling of this, because unless they state it, like, nobody really knows. So
yeah, I think most of the stuff we've ran into have been lower level spells, and I think as you get into the higher levels, that becomes more prominent. But I don't think it at 4th level or 3rd level, it's already handling those spells. It's only once you start, we don't even have access to 5th level, 6th level, 7th level spells yet. And I don't know if we've had any 5th, 6th, 7th level spells cast at us yet. Fireball was a 3rd level spell, so it wasn't a big deal. So
but I don't know,
it was interesting. Yeah.
There isn't like a hard, fast rule, I think. And maybe there's something from Jeremy on Twitter about this. Now that I think about it, there's probably something that he tweeted out about it. But I think that's an interesting problem, because a lot of times a DM will even slip of the tongue, be like, all right, so he's casting Cone of Cold. Okay, well now I know that is a X level spell. I'm going to cast Counterspell at that same level to like ensure that it's countered. And it's just kind of like, oh, well, as the DM, I shouldn't have announced that. Now I feel, like, or do you get in an argument of like, well, your character doesn't know that. So then it's like, yeah, but I know that, so I don't want to waste like a 3rd level slot. But
my wizard's like a 19 intelligence, which really is like, a genius level. Yeah. I think it is hard. I think I did notice my DM, Danimal, there was a point when because he knows I counterspell, and I've been counterspelling since the beginning, because that's been a real big theme of my character. In fact, all of my spells have messed with him quite a bit. So he does a good job of countering me, or thinking about what I'm about to do to counter him and be ready for it. And he did I remember some language he was using at some point where he says, like, the bad guy starts to cast something without necessarily giving away the entire thing. But I think you still can only get away with so much, because you still have to start to describe the effect. And at no point can you not decide to use your reaction. Like, so I can wait to the very end of your description of whatever you're doing and then say, you know what? I have a reaction. I want to do this thing.
Yeah.
And the thing it made me think about, which he does a really good job, and it was super funny. And actually he even did a funny thing too, where we had a NPC wizard with us. So we had the keystone cops of fireball cast, I counter, this guy counters my counter, our wizard counters his counter, fireball doesn't go off. So there was like 3 counter spells all going off, and like spell slots are going left and right. And there's this, and probably the funny thing about describing that is nobody saw anything. Like, it was just like a duel of wits, or people staring at each other, and not really any flashy things happening as far as the way you might describe it.
Yeah, others, if that's how you want to describe it. Like, I like to describe counterspell as like the fireball does go off, but they like wrap it around or something and make
or just
it go
pull it apart.
Yeah,
I think how do you describe the counter?
Counterspell and Dispel are two spells where people are just like, well, I don't know how to describe that because I just like erase this magic. And I'm like, but that's so boring. Like you could have all these cool magical effects to counter a spell or to dispel a spell. But how you counter a counter is maybe as the fireball's going off, he's trying to rip it apart. Your counterspell is actually holding it together. And so I don't know. I just like that idea.
So the whole thing made me think about, because from a player standpoint, I want to argue, right? I want to do this thing and the DM's against me and that whole thing. But when you step away from it, when you're just thinking about the fun of the game, and it made for an epic fight. It made for a lot of swinging this way and swinging that way and lots of cool moments. It reminded me as a dungeon master also to remember that your characters don't always outthink your characters. Every now and then let them do that thing that they want to do, or it's iconic for their character to do, so that they feel like that's the thing I do. If I'm the big barbarian who goes in and I can take a ton of damage and it's really cool how I'm able to do this for my party and I'm able to absorb this stuff, don't always, as a smart DM, then just bypass the barbarian and go for the guys in the back, right? You're just like, I'm not even going to put damage into that guy. I'll just bypass him and deal with him at the end. Or I'm just going to hold person that guy and be done. You can do it every now and then to shake it up, but let them be iconic. Let them be that character they want to do and do those cool, iconic things. Just make your fights dynamic. Just add enough stuff in there that it's not reliant on one thing doing the one big boss. And if they shut the one big boss down, that's the end of the encounter. I'm finding that you want to have multiple things in play, whether it's environmental. Damble did this good thing, and I'm sure it's in the module, but maybe he added some pieces into it, that this guy was able to teleport away and put himself into different positions to really challenge our group. Because if he wasn't able to move like he did, we were probably going to take him down in maybe a round or a round and a half with the amount of damage that our guys are putting out. And a party knows to focus fire, right? Dungeon masters are pretty good about not necessarily taking everything that's on the board and then focus firing down a character, because we know how that might make somebody feel if it's just like, oh, I'm going to kill your character and now I'm going to kill your character. That's, but players are never afraid or ashamed of focus firing down a bad guy. In fact, they love it, and they do it with glee if they can. If they can kill your guy in one shot, or they've come up with I have this magic item that I forgot about, and guess what? You're banished to the nine hells, and you're never coming back. And that was your big bad guy who owns the big black pyramid, and that's the end of that. Oh, okay. As a dungeon master, you failed because you didn't make the encounter dynamic enough. You didn't have environmental effects going on. You didn't have little minions messing with the party while the big bad guy was trying to do its thing. And you've got to make your fights really dynamic. I think if you're gonna face off a smart 4 or 5 player party of mid to high level stuff. That was what I learned this week for myself. It was really good. I hate that counter rule, that counterspell rule, because I really felt like if you're gonna have a wizard duel, there needs to be a way for you to counter the spell of a wizard, right? 2 wizards fighting. Take everything else out of the equation. It's just 2 wizards are about to fight. It comes down to now the person who gets to cast the spell also gets to counter the person who's trying to counter. And that just seems counterintuitive to me for wizards dueling. Like, I just don't like
there should be a separate mechanic for wizard dueling.
Yeah,
like in Dungeon Crawl Classics, which you should
something.
Totally read that situation. They have all these kind of like wizard duel rule. It's like a whole subsection of rules just for how can a wizard attack another wizard with spells, or magic users, I should say. So
it was interesting. I learned a new rule. We still had a good fight, and that was Tomb of Annihilation. Without trying to spoil too much of it, I think we've just ended a big major part of that, and I think we're about to move into the last major part. Cool. The big kind of what the whole thing is named about, the tomb, I'm assuming at this point. So we've gotten everything done up until that point. So it's been really fun. It will also be interesting the way I think it goes, because I've not watched anybody play I watched some other groups play Tomb of Annihilation, but mostly through just the jungle part, right? Moving around in the jungle, exploring and doing things. I didn't really do much past that. But I get the impression or the feeling that once you hit this point in this module, things speed up. So it may be that it's only, maybe it's 7 more sessions, or maybe 5, 6, or 7 sessions. It shouldn't be too much longer, and the whole thing is wrapped up. So it'd be interesting to see what happens after that too. Like, do we get moved into another module? Does the group then say, hey, that was great, and we all move on? Do we play in something else? Does somebody else take the DM helm and then that group runs through something? We're at that point where those ideas start to come up. Do we start new characters and go somewhere else and do something else? So in that time slot, or we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but I'm having a lot of fun playing a war mage. And it's awesome. I really enjoy it a ton. So play again this coming up week. What did Jordan get to do while playing Dungeons and Dragons? Because you got like 3 games. You play Friday, Saturday, Sunday at this point. So you 3-day run of gameplay.
So Sunday is my game with my Eldritch Knight, my Warforged Eldritch Knight, and we're coming up on it was the final battle. And so an army is attacking this kingdom, and we're trying to keep we're commanding NPCs and trying to do all kinds of stuff. I ended up getting a Infernal Tack, which allows me to summon a Nightmare Mount. And I didn't realize that the Nightmare Mount could fly. So that was really fun. I was like, oh, I'll summon this. I got this magic item. We'll see what it is. And then they handed me the stats, and I'm like, I can fly 90 feet? Holy cow. So I'm like zipping around on this horse with my Sunblade attacking everything. We had a lot of fun. That's a 2-parter. So we're going to finish it this Sunday because the fight was literally that long. Like, I think we were in combat for like 3 hours straight. And we need to and then after we kind of got rid of all the minions and the army is dwindled, then the big bad evil guy showed up, and so now we have to take care of him. It's going to be kind of crazy. I'll probably talk about this more next week because I want it to be finalized. But yeah, but then in Saltmarsh, we did a really interesting thing where in the game, there is a point where your players can basically be part of the Lizard Folk Olympics. And there's a bunch of lizard folk games that they can compete in and against lizard folk. And it's just a battle of whatever. And one of them is hurling a tortoise shell as far as you can into the ocean. And another one is battling or grappling fish and who can hold the fish the longest. So everybody kind of makes strength checks to see who they can hold the fish. The last one is one of the lizard folk has hidden a magic ring in the bottom of the ocean in a sunken, ruined area. So there's a bunch of buildings and stuff underwater. And you have 1 physical hour to find this ring before the lizard folk find it. And they set it up so that the lizard folk will find it in an hour, so you have to find it in less than an hour. Otherwise the lizard folk automatically find it. This was a fun mechanic because I literally put an hour timer on my phone, and I made it so everybody could more or less see my phone. And I said, are you guys diving in? And they're like, we're diving in. And I'm like, and go. And I hit, go on my hour-long timer. And they had 1 physical hour to find this ring, and they didn't know where it was. And there were fights. There was misdirections. There was a lot of investigation checks to look through rubble, trying to find this ring and trying to find all this stuff. And it was a really interesting mechanic. I've never done that before, where I'm like, no, you guys have literally 1 hour. It made combat go super fast because they were just like, we got to get through this combat really, really quickly because we're wasting time, even though a combat is 6 or, maybe 30 seconds long. In game time, it's, probably 15 to 20 minutes in actual time. So they really were trying to speed up combat, and they were trying to do a bunch of other stuff. And it was really interesting. So I was curious if you'd ever used a physical timer with your players, maybe a puzzle or maybe something like that, where you're like, nope, you literally have 15 minutes to figure this out. And it's 15 real world minutes, not anything that your players will do in game. But
yeah, probably sparingly. But I did like adding it in, especially when every now and then in the middle of a fight, or even it's not even in a fight where I will do it quite a bit. It's when they're having conversations, intense conversations with NPCs that they just come across. because what they tend to want to do is they want to talk with each other about, well, you know, like they want to step back and say, okay, guys, how do we want to handle this group of native whatever we just found in the jungle, let's say. And they're like, well, we don't know who they are. And they just go into a conversation and all, but they get 6 seconds, you know, in rounds wise to either say, what are you going to do here? This all is happening super fast.
Yeah.
And you don't have a way to talk in front of the people that are right in front of you. They can hear everything you can say. So how are you going to work on this? So a lot of times I like to make sure that they don't have big, long conversations. I like to egg them on with, you guys only have some time, stuff's starting to happen.
Yeah.
And then every now and then there's been something where there's a time limit. In fact, every round in the Abbey, there was a demon that a ritual had just finished, and the portal out was weakened, and the demon was going to try to break out of the portal. And it had like a 4-round effect. So each time it would throw itself at the portal and try to break it. And I would definitely describe at the top of the round, the room is shaking. You can see if you're anybody that was looking in the portal, you see this gigantic Balrog-like thing hurling itself at what looks like a glass portal window, and then little cracks appear. And then let's go with the rest of the round. They're fighting, they're doing stuff, and they're trying to beat a necromancer or whatever. And then the top of the round comes around again. You see that thing hit the window again, and then more cracks are happening. So just really diving into this. You guys better do something really quick, or this is going to get out of hand.
Yeah.
You better figure it out. So adding tension by using like some type of time constraint can be really fun.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, they all go, oh, like they have a huge deep breath, as if they were there, because they're just so into it. So I love doing it every now and then just to ramp up that tension. So it's really
I wish we had gotten down to the wire, but not unfortunately, but like fortunately for my players, they ended up going to some of the correct spots. And so they had like a couple of combats, but nothing really that huge. And then they ended up finding the ring with about 10 minutes left to spare on the clock. And the only thing I would have done differently is I think if I knew where they were going to go in what direction, I would have slowed down myself in combat to really make it be like, yeah, you guys have about 2 minutes left and you find it. And so that would have been really fun. But they had about 10 minutes left, but they had a great time. And once they found the ring, they're like, we run to the surface as fast as we possibly can. And they like swam back to the surface, and they're like, we won. And so that was really cool. Our artificer is buying supplies like gloves and hats and things like that because he can infuse them to make them magical objects. So he's making all kinds of weird magical objects for his character, which is a lot of fun. And and we're exercising downtime rules. So that's the other fun thing about this is after every kind of big adventure, they get like a week of downtime that they can either bank and use later, or they can use during that downtime. But we have one guy running a business. He's running a tavern. And so he rolls percentile die to see how well his tavern does. We have another guy that really likes to do pit fighting. So he goes to these underground pit fighting rings and wins money that way. Our bard does like performances and things like that. So it's been really fun, really interesting stuff. And we're having a lot of good times with it. So yeah, that's kind of like, I'm thoroughly enjoying Saltmarsh. I think it's a really great adventure, and I like how you can really make it your own because there isn't a large linear path. It's kind of divided up into sections, and your players can, if they want to go on like a million side quests, there are not a million, but there are plenty of side quests that they can go on before getting back to the main adventure. And I really like that. It's a lot of fun. So good book. I recommend it.
And I think everybody's been getting into downtime. Like my players are really excited about the keep they just fixed up. They're talking about how they're going to expand it. Our druid is creating a grove. The ranger's looking for a place to put a lodge, and he wants to do a mine because he's a dwarf, and he's been seeing these mountains. And he thinks he could start a mine,
that would be cool.
Out there. Yeah. And then our barbarian wants to do a pirate ship, but they wants one that is a floating pirate ship because he's heard in the lore that there are ships that fly because we have a Gith Zerai in our campaign. So they have times where he tells stories about where he came from, and so the orc is taking that as like, what? There's floating ships? We could have a floating ship and we could raid places. So he wants to find a way to get a floating ship that he could raid places on. So they're all looking at ways to do their downtime and do the different things. And they all bought strongholds and followers. They've been reading through it and seeing all the cool things that they can do in that too. So It's fun. I think that's an aspect of the game that maybe not as many people have looked at before, but there's definitely now enough rules out there for a lot of people to take care of that. Running establishments, doing potion generation, creating magic items, purchasing things, or having something purchased for you by having a broker go out and try to find it, that type of thing. Spending that money, spending the how is your lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and where are you staying, where are you eating in between the adventures, put some time in between there. I think it's been really good. And the players seem to have a lot of fun doing it too.
Yeah, it's awesome. And that's about, well, and then on my BX game, we had a lot of fun with that, but we're out of time. So I'll talk about BX next week. But we had a special guest of Eden Lacey from the Dragon Friends podcast. They were on our BX game, which was a lot of fun. And I'm a big fan of Dragon Friends. So I was just like, that's really cool. And so we got to play with Eden Lacey. Lex did a really good job of being a large desert dragon that we had to interact with. And that was a lot of fun. It's really good. That's Seekers of the Scorpion Crown, which is today at 1 p.m. Pacific time, I believe, was when we'll start on the Greyhawk channel. If you want to come watch me play some D&D today, it should be a lot of fun.
Very cool. That's the one you die in a lot, right?
Yeah. So I'm down to one character, but Anger the Cleric he's lived the last 3 sessions. So here's hoping that he lives a little longer. It helps when you get to higher levels, and he's level 4 now. You just have a little more hit points, but it's brutal. It's a brutal game. So, thank you guys for coming out. That's our show, everybody. Really excited to have you in chat. There was a lot of great discussion in YouTube and in Twitch chat. So thank you guys for just being active and awesome. We we kind of skim the chat while we're listening to each other talk, to try and keep up with everybody. But, yeah, just hanging out with us. It was really awesome. Be sure to like us on iTunes if you wouldn't mind, and not like us, but review us on iTunes rather. And that would be really swell of you. It helps get the show out there further in the world, which is what we're trying to do, because we think we have a fun show and we want other people to know about it. So tell your friends, because my friends all watch and listen already. So, and that's it. Anything else before we take off, sir?
Nope. Keep that conversation going on the YouTube comment area and on the VODs and the Twitch area. It just helps keeping that all the Dungeon Masters giving points and all the players talking about their experiences. We love to hear it. So keep it up.
Yep.
And check us out on Twitter. You can send us questions or show ideas on Twitter. We're always keeping an eye out on that.
Yeah,
and what we're doing is on there. So.
Yep. Sweet. We will talk to you guys next week with another episode of the Saturday Morning D&D Show. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.